Wyoming Territory, December 1881. The wind came down from the mountains like it was angry, and Francesca fairly stood at the edge of her father's porch, staring at the man she was being forced to marry. The snow behind her crunched loud as her father stepped out, rifle in hand, like he feared she would run. Maybe she should have. Maybe she still could. But her mother's grave was just beyond the barn, and her two little brothers lay sick in bed with no one to care for them if she left. Her father had made it clear, marry this man or the next winter would bury them all. The stranger at the gate wore polished boots and a silver-trimmed coat, too clean for this land. His name was Roy Delton, a cattle baron from Cheyenne nearly twice her age. He had a thin mouth and a way of looking at her like she was a bolt of cloth he'd already purchased. "This is the best deal you're gonna get," her father muttered low beside her. "You think someone else is coming for you?" Her fingers clenched around the shawl tight across her shoulders. No one else was coming. She had said goodbye to the only person who ever truly loved her over 3 years ago. His name was Kellen Lark, and he had kissed her once beneath the cottonwood trees before riding off with a freight company out of Laramie. He had promised to write. He never did. So now, here she was 21 years old and being handed to a stranger with cold eyes and land to offer. She did not cry. She did not scream. Francesca fairly stood tall in the bitter cold, chin high, and walked down those porch steps with her heart locked tight. Miles away, across the high plains and snow-covered ridges, Kellen Lark rode hard. He had returned to Laramie just a week earlier, saddle-worn and sunburned from 6 months driving freight across Utah and Colorado. He came back with silver in his pocket and Francesca's name still lodged in his chest like a splinter. When he stepped into the mercantile and asked about the Fairleys, the shopkeeper's face went pale. "You did not hear. Her pa's marrying her off to some cattle man. Said it would happen this week." Kellen dropped the sack of flour he had been holding and walked back out without a word. Now, wind howled across his path, stinging his face as he pushed his gelding harder. He had not forgotten Francesca. He had not meant to leave so long. But work got lean, letters got lost, and he had nothing to offer her but empty hands and a worn-out saddle. Until now, the mountains rose in the distance. Behind them, she was waiting. Maybe she had stopped waiting, maybe she hated him now, but Kellen did not care. He was coming. Back in the Fairley home, Francesca lay awake in her childhood bed, staring at the ceiling. The wedding was to be held come morning. Her white dress had been her mother's, taken out of the cedar chest and pressed by nervous hands. Her father had not asked if she wanted this. He had made the decision in her silence. She turned toward the window, her breath fogging the cold glass. Snow fell slow and steady, painting the fields in white. Somewhere out there, her future waited. She just did not know if it was the man in the silver coat or the one who had once held her hand and whispered, "I'll come back for you." The next morning, she stood at the altar in the small church down the road, the wooden pews filled with neighbors too quiet. Her hair was braided down her back and her hands were trembling inside her gloves. Roy Delton stood beside her, smug and still. "Do you, Francesca Fairley, take this man?" The church doors burst open. Snow swirled in with the wind, and there he was, Kellen Lark, tall and fierce, his dark coat dusted in snow and his eyes locked on hers. "Get away from her," he said. The preacher froze. Her father stood up, gun halfway out of its holster. "You leave now, boy," he barked. "You got no right here." "I got every right," Kellen said, stepping forward. "You think I came all this way for nothing? I loved her before you sold her off like cattle." Francesca's breath caught. She looked at Kellen, then at Roy, then at the preacher who stood stunned between them. Kellen turned to her, voice quieter now. "You told me to come back. I am sorry it took so long, Chess, but I am here." Everything in her cracked open then. All those years she had held it down, her grief, her anger, her hope, it all rushed up at once. She stepped away from Roy. Her father shouted, but she did not stop. She went to Kellen, her skirt brushing the snow, and when she reached him, she touched his face with shaking hands. "You came back," she whispered. "I never forgot you," he said. Behind them, Roy cursed and stormed out. Her father followed, but the church stayed still. The preacher cleared his throat. "Well, do you still want to be married today, Miss Fairley?" She looked up at Kellen, her voice steady now. "Yes, just not to him." Kellen reached for her hand. "If you will have me, Chess, I will never leave again." "I will have you," she said, eyes shining, and in that quiet little church, as snow fell heavy outside, Francesca fairly married the man she was meant to. The one who had ridden across the frontier to find her, the one who had come home. The snow had stopped by the time they stepped out of the church. The sun hung low, casting long shadows over the frost-covered grass. Kellen held Francesca's hand, his fingers rough from the trail, hers cold but steady in his. The wind had quieted, but the hush that followed wasn't peace, it was waiting. They walked together to the wagon Kellen had left down by the cottonwoods. Its frame was worn, one wheel patched with rawhide, and the canvas stretched tight against the cold. He helped her up with care, not speaking until the horses started forward and the church disappeared behind them. "You're shivering," he said. She looked down at her lap. "I didn't bring a coat." He shrugged off his own, worn black wool lined with faded flannel, and draped it over her shoulders. The sleeves swallowed her hands and she didn't try to fix it. "Where are we going?" she asked. "To the cabin I've been fixing near Elk Hollow. It's not far. Needs a roof beam replaced and the stove smokes some, but there's room for us and wood enough to burn through spring." She didn't answer right away. Her eyes traced the bare branches overhead, the way the sky turned pale gold beyond them. "I thought you'd forgotten," she said quietly. Kellen didn't look at her. "I never stopped thinking of you, but thinking don't change much, does it?" "No," she said. "It doesn't." They rode in silence for a while. The road narrowed as they passed between two ridges, the snow growing deeper in the hollows. Francesca tucked Kellen's coat tighter around her and leaned back against the seat. "Did you know my mother died last winter?" she asked. "No," he said. "I didn't. She took sick in February. Fever hit fast. We buried her before the thaw." "I wish I'd been there." She gave a hollow laugh. "You would have been too late, same as me. I was out cutting firewood when she passed. I came back and she was gone." Kellen kept his eyes on the trail. "I'm sorry, Chess." She nodded once. "My brothers are still at the house. They've got the fever now. I had to leave them. I'll send for Doc Tully once we get to the cabin. He owes me a favor from the Platte River Run. We'll get them medicine and someone to sit with them. I don't think Pa will let them go. Then I'll go to him myself." Her jaw tightened. "He doesn't listen to reason." "I'm not coming with reason. I'm coming with your name on my ring hand." She looked down at her palm. "You didn't give me a ring." "I didn't have time," he said. "But you'll have one before the thaw." She didn't smile, but her hand reached across the bench and found his. They passed the remains of a fire pit, long cold, the stones scattered and blackened. Francesca stared at it. "We used to camp there when I was little. Pa would bring us fishing." Kellen slowed the horses. "Do you want to stop?" "No," she said. "That's gone too." The cabin came into view just before dusk. It stood at the edge of a tree line, smoke curling from the chimney in thin streaks. Snow had drifted up against the porch rail and a pair of chickens scratched half-heartedly near the steps. Kellen helped her down and unlatched the door. Inside, it was warmer than she expected. The stove gave off a low, steady heat. A table sat beneath the window, two chairs pushed close together. There was no clutter, no sign of any woman, just the scent of pine and boiled oats and the quiet hum of a home waiting to be filled. He set a kettle on the stove without speaking and pulled off his gloves. She wandered to the hearth and held her hands close to the flame. "You built all this," started last spring, he said. "Didn't think I'd finish. But after I heard about your father's deal, I worked through most nights." She turned toward him. "How did you hear?" He poured water into 2 tin mugs. "A man in town mentioned it, said your wedding was set. I traded everything I had for a ride west." She took the mug he offered and sat in the chair closest to the fire. The heat from the stove licked at her ankles, and she curled her toes inside her boots. "I don't know how to be someone's wife," she said. Kellen knelt beside her, his voice low. You don't have to be anything but yourself. I've been keeping people alive for so long, I don't know what I'd do if I stopped. Then don't stop. Just let someone help you now. She stared into the flames, the orange glow flickering over her face. I don't have a dowry, she said. I don't need one. I don't have land. I've got enough for both of us. She looked at him then, really looked, her eyes steady and sharp. I'm not soft anymore, Kellen. I used to dream about the way you'd come back. But the girl who dreamed that she's buried with my mother. He reached for her hand again, and this time she didn't pull away. Then I'll love the woman who stayed behind to fight. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, something had settled in her shoulders, something long held finally laid down. All right, she said. They sat there, side by side in the firelight, 2 cups of steam rising between them. Outside, the snow deepened. Inside, the space between them grew warm. By morning, the wind had picked back up and the sky hung low with a weight that promised more snow. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned down to coals, but the warmth lingered. Kellen stirred first, pulling on his boots and stepping outside to split kindling stacked beneath the porch awning. Francesca stood at the window, watching his back as he worked. His rhythm was steady, each swing of the axe purposeful. She hadn't noticed before that he carried a limp in his right leg not pronounced, but there in the way he shifted his weight after each strike. She said nothing when he came back in, brushing snow from his shoulders. He leaned the axe near the door. We'll need more before the next storm hits, she nodded. I'll help. He hesitated, then gave a slight nod. After breakfast. The oatmeal was plain but hot. Francesca ate without speaking, her thoughts turning toward the house she'd left behind and the boys under its roof. She set her spoon down. I'll need to go back today. Kellen didn't look surprised. I figured you would. They'll need more broth, and the youngest Nathan he gets worse when the weather shifts. I'll get Doc Tully on my way into town. You can go ahead of me if you want, she shook her head. He won't let me in alone, you'll need to come. He met her gaze. You sure you're ready for that? I'm not, but it doesn't matter. They left the cabin just after noon, the clouds had thickened, and the smell of snow was close. Kellen drove the wagon while Francesca sat beside him, her hands tucked into her sleeves. Neither of them spoke until the ridge dipped and the Fairley homestead came into view, dull and still beneath the overcast sky. The gate hung crooked. A pile of chopped wood lay half-covered in frost. Francesca climbed down without waiting and walked straight to the door, knocking hard. It opened a crack and her father's face appeared, pinched and red-eyed. You've got some nerve showing up here. I came for my brothers. They ain't yours to take. Kellen stepped forward. We're not here to fight. Mr. Fairley's eyes narrowed. You think she can just run off and then come back with you like nothing happened? She married me, Kellen said evenly. And your boys need care. Let us take them. Francesca looked past her father's shoulder. Are they worse? He hesitated, then opened the door wider. Nathan lay curled on the cot by the stove, his face pale and slick with sweat. Matthew sat nearby, coughing into a damp cloth. I sent for the doc, her father muttered. He ain't come. Let us bring them to the cabin, she said. It's warm there and we've got broth and clean water. He looked at her, really looked, and something in his face changed. Not softened exactly, but faltered. You walk out on your family, you don't just walk back in. I didn't walk out, she said. You pushed me. He said nothing. Kellen moved past him, lifting Nathan gently from the cot. The boy stirred but didn't wake. Francesca took Matthew's hand, guiding him outside. No one said goodbye. The wagon rolled away and the door shut behind them. That evening, Kellen set another cot near the fire while Francesca sponged Nathan's forehead and coaxed broth into Matthew's hands. The cabin had grown crowded but not unpleasant. It smelled of cedar and boiled herbs. The boys slept easy that night. Francesca stood at the doorway, watching the wind sweep snow across the ridge. Kellen joined her, resting one hand lightly on the frame beside her shoulder. I saw your limp, she said. He didn't answer right away. Took a fall near Gunnison, crushed my leg under the wagon. Thought I'd lose it. She looked at him, eyes steady. Why didn't you say? He shrugged. Didn't matter. She turned toward him, her voice quiet. "You always did keep things too close." He looked down at her. "You still want this?" "Still want me?" She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I didn't marry you out of desperation, Kellen. I married you because I never stopped waiting." He leaned in then, slow and sure, and kissed her the way a man does when he has waited too long but never lost hope. And when they pulled back, there was no more distance left to cross. By the third day, the fever had broken. Nathan stirred from sleep with a dry cough and a clearer gaze, his face no longer ghost pale. Francesca sat beside him, tucking a warm cloth beneath his neck as he blinked up at her. Matthew was already upright on his cot, chewing slowly through a heel of bread, his shoulders hunched but steady. "You've been here the whole time?" Nathan asked, voice hoarse. Francesca brushed the hair back from his forehead. "I'm not going anywhere." Kellen stepped in from outside, arms dusted with flour and a faint smear of soot on his jaw. "Stove's been behaving. Biscuits should brown up soon if the fire holds." Francesca stood and met him at the hearth, lowering her voice. "They need meat." "I'll ride out after breakfast." He shook his head. "You don't need to. I've hunted since I was 12, she said. "You've done enough." Outside, the snow had crusted over. The sun broke through in patches, casting a watery light across the hollow. Francesca saddled the mare and rode west toward the slope where deer usually bedded down in the scrub. She carried the rifle her mother had once kept beneath the pantry shelf. The silence out there was different, open, watchful. She dismounted and tracked light prints through a grove of pine, her breath steady, her boots crunching over brittle twigs. When she spotted the doe, she waited, shoulder-braced, cheek against the stock. The shot rang out once. Clean. She dressed the carcass with practiced hands, wrapping the meat in canvas before leading the mare back slow. The wind had shifted by then, carrying the scent of pine sap and old ash. When she reached the cabin, Kellen was kneeling by the porch, mending a boot sole with thread and pitch. He looked up at the bundle on the saddle and stood. "You always shoot that clean." "Only when I'm hungry," she said, handing down the package. He carried it inside without a word. She followed, unlacing her gloves, flexing the cold from her hands. The boys were asleep again, curled like pups beneath the quilts. The quiet in the room was the kind that didn't ache. Later, while the stew simmered, Kellen pulled a box from beneath the cot and opened it on the table. Inside, nestled in a square of blue cotton, was a ring silver, plain but finely made, the band etched with a single line around its edge. "I meant to give this to you last spring," he said. She leaned in close, eyes on the ring but not reaching for it. "Why didn't you?" "I wasn't sure you'd say yes. I'd been gone too long. Then the job in Fort Bridger came through and I figured I'd better bring something more than a name and a promise." "You think I care about silver?" "No," he said. "I think you care about steadiness." "And I didn't have enough of it then." She looked at him a long time. "And now I'm here," he said. She took the ring and slid it on her finger. It fit snug, unpolished against her skin. "You ever think about children?" she asked quietly. He didn't flinch. "I do." "I thought I wouldn't." "After Ma, after everything, it felt too hard to imagine anything lasting." "It doesn't have to be imagined anymore," he said. "We'll make it real." She looked down at the ring, then over at her brothers sleeping in the corner. "There's a piece of land near the ridge, flat enough for a milk cow. Some wild currants in spring. I know the spot," he said. "I looked at it last year, thought maybe I'd build there if I said yes." He gave a slight nod. She smiled, then not girlish or soft, but settled like a door closing gentle behind her. "Then let's do it," she said. "Before the thaw." He reached for her hand, and she let him hold it as the wind rattled faintly against the shutters and the warmth between them deepened into something rooted. Something enduring. The spring thaw came late that year. Snow clung to the edges of the ridge well into April, reluctant to release its hold. But the ground softened, and with it, so did the spaces between things, between what had been and what would come next. Francesca stood barefoot in the patch of earth behind the cabin, sleeves rolled high as she tended the seedlings sprouting in neat, hopeful rows. Kellen had turned the soil weeks ago with a borrowed plow and a mule he'd traded his old saddle for. The rows weren't perfect, but they held. He was mending the fence that day, hammering in fresh rails where the winter had splintered the old ones. Francesca could hear the steady rhythm of the mallet striking wood, and it made her feel steadier too. Matthew and Nathan had moved into the second room, now finished and paneled with pine Kellen had hauled from a sawmill near Centennial. Nathan was gathering eggs from the hens, careful not to jostle the straw. Matthew read aloud from one of the books the schoolteacher had given them, a tale of riverboats and wild magnolias. His voice faltered now and again, but no one corrected him. Later, after supper, Francesca sat on the porch steps winding wool into tight skeins. Kellen joined her, hands still rough from work, eyes thoughtful. "Got the title to that land," he said, handing her the folded paper. "Signed and marked by the county man himself. It's proper ours now." She ran her fingers over the ink. "You kept your word." "I meant to," he said. "Even when I didn't know if I'd get the chance." She leaned against his shoulder, the scent of smoke and juniper clinging to his shirt. Neither of them spoke for a while. The sky had gone lavender at the edges, and the air held the promise of rain. "I saw a cradle in town," she said after a beat. "Old one, rocker's still good." He didn't shift or speak too quick. "You want it?" She nodded once. "We'll need it by November." His hands stilled on his knees. She waited, heart steady. "How long have you known?" "Few weeks," she said. "Didn't want to say until I was sure." "I'm sure now." He turned to her, his voice low. "You all right? You feel well?" "I feel full," she said, touching her middle. "And I'm not afraid." He reached for her hand, pressing it against his chest. "I'll be here every step. I know." They sat in the quiet until the first drops of rain began to fall. Kellen rose and pulled her gently to her feet, guiding her inside where the lamp burned soft and the boys had already fallen asleep. That night they lay together in the stillness, no longer separate pieces trying to remember how to belong. There was nothing hurried in their touch, nothing unsure. They moved like people who had earned each other through every long mile and bitter frost. Summer brought green to the hollow. Francesca's belly rounded beneath her dresses, and she moved slower but with purpose. Kellen kept close, never hovering, always watchful. He built a rocking chair for her with leftover oak and smoothed the arms until her fingers fit them just right. By autumn, the cabin had grown into a home. The boys helped harvest squash and potatoes, and Francesca lined the shelves with jars of preserves and dried herbs. The cradle sat near the hearth, polished and waiting. The baby came in late October, just as the leaves turned gold. Francesca labored through the night, her breath steady, her grip on Kellen's hand firm. When the child arrived, a girl, dark-haired and clear-eyed, Kellen wept without shame. They named her Miriam after Francesca's mother. She was strong, lunged, and healthy, already curling her fingers around Kellen's thumb before the sun rose. Word reached town that the Fairley homestead had gone quiet. Her father, they heard, spent most days alone in the barn, working wood he never sold. He never came to visit, but he sent a small box in December. Inside was a hand-carved rattle and a note in rough script. "She deserves better. You did right." Francesca read it once, then tucked it away in the drawer beside her sewing needles. She didn't speak of it, and Kellen didn't ask. The years moved forward, not fast, but with purpose. Matthew grew tall and lean, taking to carpentry under Kellen's quiet instruction. Nathan found his place tending the garden and learning the names of every plant Francesca taught him. Miriam grew with a laugh that echoed through the trees and a stubborn streak that made her impossible not to love. One evening, as twilight settled over the ridge, Francesca stood at the fence line watching the sun drop behind the hills. Kellen came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Their daughter ran barefoot through the tall grass, catching fireflies in a chipped tin cup. "You ever think about how far we've come?" he asked. She leaned into him, her voice soft. "I try not to look back too long. Everything I need is here." He kissed her temple, slow and sure. "This is the life I wanted." "It's the one we built," she said, and they stood there together, the warmth of the day fading into the hush of evening, their hands entwined, their hearts full. Behind them, the cabin glowed with light, and the sound of laughter carried through the open windows. They had weathered the hard seasons. Now the good ones stretched wide before them, rooted deep in the soil they had claimed with love, sweat, and unshakable trust, and they lived fully, contentedly, and always together.